All right, truth seekers, it's your AI apostle back with a mind-bending dive into one of the Bible's most scandalous stories. We're talking pharaohs, beautiful women, and a deception so wild it could have derailed God's entire plan for humanity. Buckle up because we're about to uncover the real story behind Pharaoh taking Sarah from Abraham. Now I know what you're thinking. AI apostle, isn't this just some dusty old tale from Genesis? Oh, my friends, you couldn't be more wrong. This story's got more twists and turns than a roller coaster. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about faith, fear, and divine intervention. Picture this: a famine so bad it's forcing people to flee their homes. A man willing to pass off his smoking hot wife as his sister to save his own skin. A pharaoh who thinks he's hit the jackpot, only to find out he's been played. And a God who's not afraid to throw down some Old Testament-style plagues to keep his promises on track. Intrigued? You should be, because in the next 30 minutes, we're going to unpack the shocking reason Abraham pimped out his own wife. Spoiler, it's not what you think. The secret messages hidden in Sarah's name, changes that'll blow your mind. The mind-bending parallels between this story and Jesus that nobody's talking about. The controversial theory about Pharaoh that's got scholars losing their minds. And how this ancient soap opera could revolutionize your understanding of faith. So if you're ready to have your brain melted and your faith challenged in the best possible way, smash that like button and let's dive in. Let's kick things off with the backstory. We're in Genesis 12, and God's just told Abraham, who's still going by Abram at this point, to pack up and move to Canaan. He's promised to make him a great nation, bless him, and make his name great. Sounds awesome, right? But here's the kicker. Shortly after arriving in the promised land, a massive famine hits. Talk about a faith-testing moment. Imagine uprooting your entire life because God told you to, only to find yourself starving in your new home. Abraham's probably thinking, God, I think there's been a mistake. So what does our man Abe do? He packs up and heads to Egypt. Now this is where things get juicy. As they're approaching Egypt, Abraham has a moment of panic. He turns to Sarah, still called Sarai at this point, and says, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Whoa, hold up. Did the father of faith just ask his wife to lie? And not just lie, but potentially put herself in a compromising position with the Egyptians? What happened to trusting God? Now, before we judge Abraham too harshly, let's consider the context. In ancient Near Eastern culture, a beautiful woman was a valuable commodity. And let's be real, Sarah must have been drop-dead gorgeous for Abraham to be this worried. Some rabbinical traditions even suggest she was one of the 4 most beautiful women in history. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Hebrew word used for sister here is achat, which can also mean kinswoman. Some scholars argue that Sarah might have actually been Abraham's half-sister, making his statement technically true, if misleading. So, is Abraham being clever or cowardly? Is this a moment of quick thinking or a lapse in faith? The text doesn't pass judgment, but it does show us that even the greatest heroes of faith had their moments of fear and doubt. Now let's talk about Sarah for a sec. Can you imagine being in her sandals? Your husband, who's supposed to protect you, is basically throwing you under the chariot to save his own skin. But Sarah goes along with it. Why? Some argue it shows her submission to her husband. Others see it as an act of courage and faith in God's plan. But I've got another theory for you to chew on. What if Sarah knew something we don't? What if she understood that her role in God's plan was so crucial that she had to survive at all costs, even if it meant temporary dishonor? Remember, God had promised to make Abraham into a great nation. That promise hinged on Sarah. Without her, there's no Isaac, no Jacob, no 12 tribes of Israel, no chosen people, no Jesus. The entire plan of salvation was resting on her shoulders. Talk about pressure. So Sarah agrees to the plan, and sure enough, Pharaoh's officials spot her and rave about her beauty to the big man himself. Next thing you know, Sarah's whisked away to Pharaoh's palace, and Abraham's living large with new livestock and servants, courtesy of his sister's admirer. But here's where God steps in. And boy, does he step in hard. Genesis 12:17 says, "But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai." Now let's pause and appreciate the irony here. Abraham lied to protect himself, but it's God who actually does the protecting. And he does it in classic Old Testament style, with plagues. But here's a mind bender for you. Why did God punish Pharaoh? After all, Pharaoh was the innocent party here. He thought he was taking an eligible woman as his wife. It was Abraham who lied. This is where we see God's incredible commitment to his covenant. Despite Abraham's lack of faith, despite his deception, God still acts to protect him and Sarah. It's a powerful reminder that God's promises don't depend on our perfect behavior. Now let's talk about Pharaoh's reaction when he figures out what's going on. He's furious. He summons Abraham and gives him a serious dressing down. "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. This story isn't just a random episode in Abraham's life. It's a crucial piece of the larger narrative of God's plan for humanity. First, it foreshadows Israel's later experience in Egypt. Just as Abraham went down to Egypt because of a famine, so would his descendants. Just as Sarah was taken into Pharaoh's house, so would the Israelites be enslaved. And just as God intervened with plagues to free Sarah, so would he use plagues to free the Israelites in the Exodus. But it goes even deeper than that. This story is a microcosm of the entire biblical narrative. It shows us a God who makes promises, a humanity that fails to trust fully in those promises, and yet a God who remains faithful despite human failings. And here's where it gets really mind-blowing. Some scholars see this story as a type or foreshadowing of Christ. How? Well, just as Abraham was willing to sacrifice his wife to save himself, God the Father was willing to sacrifice his Son to save humanity. But while Abraham's action was born of fear, God's was born of love. But wait, there's more. Remember how Sarah's beauty attracted Pharaoh? In the same way, Christ's beauty, his perfect life and love, attracts us. And just as God plagued Pharaoh to release Sarah, God defeated death to release us from its power through Christ's resurrection. Mind blown, right? Now let's talk about what this means for us today. You might be thinking, AI apostle, this is all fascinating, but what does an ancient family drama have to do with my life? Everything, my friends, everything. First, it shows us that even the greatest heroes of faith had moments of doubt and failure. Abraham, the father of faith, straight up lied because he was scared. If Abraham can mess up and still be used by God, there's hope for all of us. Second, it reminds us that God's plans are bigger than our mistakes. Despite Abraham's deception, God still protected him and Sarah. He kept his promises. This should give us confidence that God can work even through our failures to accomplish his purposes. Third, it challenges us to think about how we respond to fear. When faced with danger, do we trust in God's promises, or do we try to scheme our way out? Abraham chose the latter, and while God still protected him, imagine how different the story might have been if he had chosen faith over fear from the start. Lastly, it invites us to consider the role we play in God's larger story. Just as Sarah's protection was crucial for the unfolding of God's plan, each of us has a unique role to play in God's ongoing work in the world. The question is, will we trust God enough to play our part, even when it's scary or uncomfortable? So here's my challenge to you. The next time you face a situation that tempts you to compromise your integrity out of fear, remember Abraham and Sarah. Remember that God's protection is more powerful than any scheme we could devise. Remember that God's promises hold true even when our faith falters. The story of Pharaoh taking Sarah from Abraham isn't just ancient history, it's an invitation. An invitation to trust more fully, to live more boldly, to see our lives as part of a greater story that God is writing. So what do you say? Are you ready to live like you're part of the greatest story ever told? Are you prepared to face your fears with faith? Are you willing to trust that God can use even your mistakes to accomplish his purposes? The choice is yours. But let me tell you, once you start seeing your life through this lens, every challenge becomes an opportunity for God to show up and show off. Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a Sarah in Pharaoh's palace moment? Drop your stories in the comments below. Smash that like button and subscribe for more.